Everybody, this is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We have another live stream here on our YouTube channel today. We are very excited to welcome Becky Sawyer from Fort Fisher, his state historic site in North Carolina. She's going to be our guest today. Thank you all so much for tuning in with us. We'll get to the introduction with Becky in just a bit, but before we get into the content that you are all so excited to be here for today, just want to give a brief introduction. Those of you who have watched many of our live streams here on our YouTube channel will be pretty familiar with what I'm going to say now, and that is, well, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Watching, I see folks tuning in already from Orlando, Florida. And if folks tuning in, if you would like to drop in where you are watching from today, that will be fantastic. We'll give you all a shout out. If you do have any questions as we go through the course of the program as well, please drop those into the chat. If you're watching this after the fact, you will not see the live chat, but we will have links down below for more information about the Fort Fisher State Historic site, as well as a previous video that we recorded about the fight at Fort Fisher in January 1865 and medical components. If you do enjoy these videos, please consider becoming a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. You will be supporting content like this. You can find that in the chat or in the description of the video today. You'll be directly supporting and contributing to projects like this one, supporting our YouTube videos, our live programs, and you'll get lots of cool perks as well. And as we are starting to get back to being maybe not fully normal, but we're working our way back towards relative normalcy at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. You can come and visit the museum for free with a membership. Join us for our programs such as walking tours that we're bringing back online. We're very excited to be welcoming folks back to the museum, as well as the Missing Soldiers Office Museum, which is where I am at today in downtown Washington, D.C. If you become a member, you get to come visit here for free as well. You can also support us by liking this video, give us a thumbs up, and also subscribing to our YouTube channel. We are putting up videos about once a week, hosting live streams like this one, as well as posting shorter content out on the battlefield, in our museums. We're really excited about adding more and more content to our YouTube channel. And we have a back catalog of videos that goes back to 2012. You can find videos dating back that far. Lots of good stuff, lots of cool stories, cool artifacts. I hope you'll subscribe and continue to join us for streams like this. We've got folks tuning in from Pittsburgh and Shiloh, Tennessee, and we have Caitlin O'Connor who says, "Go Becky," watching in Durham, North Carolina. So let me welcome in our guest today, Becky Sawyer, who is the Collections Manager and Exhibits Coordinator for Fort Fisher State Historic Site in North Carolina. Becky, how are you doing today?
Doing good.
Excellent, excellent. It is a delight to have you. For those of you watching right now live, we did have some technical difficulties as we were getting ready. So we are thrilled that it is working. Yeah, all of our fingers and toes are crossed that we continue to have good fortune in regards to internet connections here in DC and down in North Carolina as well. So Becky, we're so glad to have you on our channel for a discussion today. But before we get started, I just want to give you some time to kind of introduce yourself and the historic site where you work.
Yeah, I deal with collections management, exhibit coordination, kind of Jill of all trades, working up at the front desk, dealing with visitor services. So Fort Fisher, we have a long history. We were the largest Confederate earthen fortification built during the Civil War. There were two battles here, December of '64, and then the capture in January of 1865. And we're going to be talking about the wounded soldiers, the wounded Confederate soldiers from Fort Fisher and their trek from being wounded to being prisoners of war, and then after the war receiving artificial limbs through a program that was sponsored by the state of North Carolina between 1866 and 1868. we only have about 10% of the battlefield left, so we do give tours of that. And we also have World War II history here as well, so we do focus on that as well.
Excellent. This is a site that I have not yet had the opportunity to visit, but we're very, very excited to get down and to visit you down there. And we've been doing these series of videos on our YouTube channel that we call the On Tour series, where we go and visit historic sites, battlefields, and talk about Civil War medicine, where the Civil War medicine actually took place. And
Right.
Wilmington and Fort Fisher are high on our list for 2022. So hopefully we'll be able to get down and film some videos in partnership with you guys. And yeah, excited to tell those stories. But I'm going to step back here, Becky, and let you kind of run the show here. Very, very excited about the presentation that Becky has pulled together today, and I think you all will enjoy this as well.
That come up. Sorry. Share screen. There we go. Is it working? Yes. Okay. So we currently have an example of the Jewett-Patton leg here on display at Fort Fisher, and probably about 5-7 years ago, I did this presentation. I've kind of edited and kind of gone along with it. But it's the Jewett-Patton Leg Company and the New England Yankee who fixed North Carolina broken soldiers. And so, before the Civil War, the need for artificial limbs was only for a small population of the United States. And then Benjamin Jewett of Guilford, New Hampshire, worked for Benjamin Palmer. So Palmer had pretty much the first design for artificial legs in 1846. And ironically, I was thinking about this, how it is also the same time as the war with Mexico. So that was probably when artificial limbs became needed for military personnel. Jewett broke away from Palmer and to patent his own design of the artificial leg in 1857. And then by 1860, he would revise his patent. And this is the 1860 patent that I have on display, on the display here. So the need for artificial limbs basically increases during the American Civil War with the invention of rifled infantry, weaponry, increased severity of wounds, thus leading to amputation. The American Civil War ushered in an age of modern warfare. The advent of rifled weapons for both artillery and infantry created deadly and devastating wounds. Wounds from these weapons produce an amputation rate of about 75% on most battlefields. Soldiers stationed at Fort Fisher had to contend with stress and injury from several scenarios. Iron cannons would burst due to extreme pressure, and the little thing I have up here talks about an accident in late '62 with the Cumberland gun bursting. And so you see some of the people that were injured and who are died. Incoming rounds fired from blockading fleet on shore created deadly explosions. And then the hand-to-hand combat during the battles exposed soldiers to injuries from rifles. Wounds sustained from any of these events would have resulted in an amputation of an arm or leg or death. And there's a great quote by Julian Chisholm in 1864. Modern warfare and introduced in arms a precision of immensely increased range and perfected instruments of destruction of heavy caliber has created a new era of military surgery. So these are examples of case shot and grape shot that is in our collection at Fort Fisher. So you can see the devastation that these would have done to soldiers here at Fort Fisher. This is an interesting quote. This was a quote from Surgeon J.A. Maurus of the 117th New York. And the quote is, "Not far in advance towered the frowning fortress, and through no one saw, all knew that above in imperial majesty sat the angel of death." And so most of the injuries for Confederate soldiers came during the two battles. So in December of 64 and January of 1865, we had a total of about 500 men wounded. The wounded from the first battle were sent off to hospital number 4 in Wilmington and for surgery and had a good chance of survival, while those who were here for the second battle had a harder road to recovery because of the conditions that they were under. This was a sketch done by an artist who was with Harper's Weekly. And this is showing the temporary hospital in the Pulpit Battery, which was on the ocean side of Fort Fisher. And so, basically during the second battle, if you were wounded, you also become a prisoner of war. So you had to survive surgery, possibly have an amputation of a limb in less than ideal conditions. And so you survive surgery in the conditions of the hospital, then you're sent to prisoner of war camp. And most of those were sent to Point Lookout, Maryland. And then this is an image taken by Timothy O'Sullivan the first week of February of 1865. And this is showing where they were at. So this area right here that I'm kind of showing with my pointer, that's where the temporary hospital was at. And as you can see by, the first week of February, it's no longer used as a temporary hospital. Point Lookout, Maryland. This is a sketch of Hammond General Hospital. And most of the men from Fort Fisher were assigned to either wards 14 or 15 based off of their service records. So the majority of the prisoners of war from Fort Fisher who were not wounded were sent to Elmira, New York. But the majority of the wounded prisoners were sent to Point Lookout. And most of them arrived at Hammond General Hospital February 3rd through the 5th of 1865. And so this is just showing you, and I think 14 and 15 are down here at the bottom of the round. And this is a standard floor plan or blueprint for field hospital or for hospitals during this time. So this kind of wagon wheel, you see this a lot at hospitals up north. So the survival rate for these wounded prisoners was pretty grim. Out of 128 non-commissioned officers and enlisted men who were on the list submitted by Major General Alfred H. Terry, who were captured on January 15th, 10 had severe wounds below the waist, which resulted in amputation. Of these 10, only 4 survived to be transported to Point Lookout. Of these 4, only 3 survived to the end of the war. Privates David F. Allen, J.R. White, and Alex Sessom. Now, there was another batch of prisoners sent up to Point Lookout. They were wounded earlier in the battle, and they were over across the river at Southport, North Carolina, at the hospital there, but they were captured on January 18th. So they were sent up a little bit later. And 2 of those soldiers that we know, Kit Bland and Daniel Mott, were wounded in the ankle. It was almost a month later when Bland and Mott's wounds turned gangrenous, and each had a lower third of their leg amputated at U.S. Hammond General Hospital on the 11th and 13th, respectively. It's interesting, they talk about the different amputation methods. Bland would have the circular method, while Mott had the flap method. and both of these men would receive a Jewett patent leg after the war. This list of prisoners was actually printed in the Wilmington newspaper in February of 1865, late February of 1865. So it was almost a good month after the battle that word got out about these men being listed as prisoners of war. So, and then you can see on here that some of these guys actually died. He died January 20th, the 29th. You see the types of wounds, and they were pretty bad. This is an interesting scene, and I think this has been circulated numerous times. But this is a scene of Confederate soldiers taking the oath of allegiance at Point Lookout, Maryland, June 26, 1865. And there's always been this, you hear these stories, oh, they walked home all the way home from whatever prison camp. Well, we know that most of them, if not all of them, were sent home via rail or via boat back to their home states. As when they got back to their home state, they had to basically walk home. And then when they made it home, these amputees had the task of trying to rebuild their lives and to be able to provide for their families. So I think that was quite interesting. Now, this is, when I was doing research for this exhibit, actually found this image, and it's actually the Washington, D.C. branch. And it's right down the street from Ford's Theater. And Cossack was a Union soldier who lost his leg during the war, and he oversaw the manufacturing of limbs in Washington, D.C. So this is Cossack, and it says, artificial limbs, and that's what's on the window right here. So by late 1865, North Carolina's Governor Worth, expressed support for a contract with the Jewett Patent Leg Company of Washington, D.C., because a native North Carolinian was working in the shop as a mechanic. His name was John Ball, and he was a master leg maker who wanted to return home. And he would be the one that would oversee the manufacture of artificial limbs in North Carolina under the new program. So this little flyer actually says Raleigh, North Carolina on here, which I think is really interesting. So in January of 1866, the state of North Carolina proposed basically to go into contract with the Jewett Patent Leg Company and to provide artificial limbs for its Confederate veterans. And then between 1866 and 1868, North Carolina provided over 600 legs for its veterans, which I think is quite surprising because most states were in Reconstruction, where their coffers were pretty much gone. I've always had this speculation and theory that blockade running in North Carolina helped put money in the coffers before North Carolina was, basically the end of the war. So there was that money in the coffers, and that's what paid for this program. That's my theory, but that's what I've always thought about. And 6 veterans from Fort Fisher were issued legs, while 10 veterans were issued arms. So quite interesting. And in the newspaper, they actually said it is an eminent work of charity and justice. That the state should consider it, quote, an eminent work of charity and justice to assist all such with the common funds of the state to procure necessary limbs, and thus to restore them as far as practicable to the comfortable use of their persons, to the enjoyment of life, and to the ability to earn a subsistence. So between April of 1866 and June 18th, 1868, the old Raleigh Bayonet Factory near the terminus of the Raleigh and Gaston Railroads and near the junction of North and McDowell Streets manufactured limbs for its North Carolina veterans. So North Carolina devised a plan which amputees incurred no out-of-pocket expenses while in Raleigh. The state issued railroad passes for trips to and from the Capitol. Fittings and adjustments usually took a couple of days, and a house was provided for amputees during this time. And they advised amputees to bring blankets for bedding and a basket of bread and dry meats for their meals. And these are 3 examples of the Jewett pound legs that exist today. I think there's a 4th one, but I don't have an image of it. The one on the left belonged to Robert Hanna of the 26th North Carolina. He lost his leg at Gettysburg, and this is on display at Benville. Now, I used to work at Benville Battlefield, and I was actually working there when this leg became part of our exhibits. So that's how I got acclimated and learned about the Jewett pound legs. So then the center one is the most complete. We don't think this was ever used. This belonged to Samuel Clark. It's no longer on display. It was loaned to Archives and History. And then this last one is the one we currently have on display. It belonged to David F. Allen, who was wounded here at Fort Fisher. Now, here's an image that the family basically shared with us. We're quite fortunate that they came in and they were talking about it. And funny enough, they're like, have you ever heard this, these artificial legs? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, it's sitting in the living room of our house. Yeah, so, but they were very gracious. It's on loan to us right now. It's part of the history. It's part of, basically Confederates, learning how to basically get acclimate to society again. But this is David Allen. He lost his leg below the knee during the Second Battle. He did receive a Jewett pound leg in 1866. He filed for a state pension in 1901, and he dies in Robeson County in 1917. Now, what's interesting about this image, I'm going to go to the next slide. There you can see the strap on his thigh for his artificial limb, which is really cool that you could see that in the image. When we were working on the exhibit, I kind of zoomed in on like, he's wearing his artificial limb in this photo, which is awesome. Don't know when this image was taken. So it has to be somewhere between, post 66, possibly 1870. I've kind of wondered if he's wearing a Union sack coat because there's the way the coat is cut and there's the double seam right here, but I don't know for certain. But it's a great image and it's a great object to interpret, no doubt. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the other soldiers from Fort Fisher who received the artificial limbs. And this is Charles Cherry. He was actually wounded during the first battle, sent to hospital number 4 for surgery. And as you can see on his report, wounded in both legs, severely, right leg amputated. He applied for a leg in October of 66. Again, he lives till 1916 and dies in Edgecombe County, North Carolina. And he does receive a pension as well from the state of North Carolina. Christopher Bland, now he's an interesting character. During the first battle, he climbs up the flagpole at Mound Battery to secure the flag that had been shot down, only to be wounded during the second battle in the ankle. He was captured on January 18th, sent to Point Lookout for surgery, and he received a Jewett pound leg in 66. Now, Daniel Mott, when I was working on research for the exhibit, I came across this image, and it's in the Pender County Library. This is him and his family sitting on the front porch, probably pretty close to 1890s. But in this image, he's wearing a homemade version of an artificial leg, which you do see a lot. A lot of times, and in the case of David Allen, we actually have two. We have his Jewett hand leg, and then we have his homemade version that he wore as well in our exhibit hall. So here it is. He's just sitting on the porch, and as you can see, smoking a cigar. But right in here, I don't know how he has it attached to that board, but I think it's quite interesting, that version of a peg leg of sorts. James White, he's our other one. He does receive an artificial limb, but again, no images of him. So we have his service records showing the amputation of his leg, and that he had a gunshot fracture to the right leg, and so forth. So the service records do help us tell the story as well when we don't have images. Now, these are all men who lost a limb due to battle. Our exception is Mr. Vines. He was captured at Fort Fisher, sent to Elmira, had both of his legs amputated due to frostbite. Makes it back home, and the family actually gave us a copy of this image of him when we were doing the exhibit, because I had mentioned him, but I didn't have an image of him. But when we were redoing our exhibits, they gave me this copy of this image, which is quite amazing. And more than likely, he's a double amputee at this point. And this is his obituary from the newspaper, talking about him. So basically, they give him up for dead, and then he shows up in Wilmington. Veterans fitted for other artificial limbs. You had men who were fitted for artificial hands and arms. And these are the men who were wounded at Fort Fisher or other actions as well. So, and then I highly recommend these two books. Phantom Pain was written by Ainsley Wegner with the Office of Archives and History. And there's an index in the back listing North Carolina veterans who were issued artificial limbs from this program. And then Mending Broken Soldiers is a great book. There is an index for Union veterans who received artificial limbs. And ironically enough, looking at that index, there were 5 USCTs from Fort Fisher, the Fort Fisher campaign, who were issued Jewett pan legs from their wounds during the campaign. So I thought that was quite interesting. That's all.
Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Becky. That was fascinating, and great to see something at the more granular level, talking about kind of these programs, which we talk a lot about at the museum in Frederick, talking about the kind of grand scheme of these artificial limb programs that developed during the war and afterwards, North and South. But it's quite amazing to see it at such a kind of personal and localized level, to see it in North Carolina, but also those veterans of Wilmington and Fort Fisher, to see that research that you all done has been amazing. Thank you for sharing it.
My pleasure.
And on the note of the books that Becky pointed out, I will say that for the Civil War Medicine Museum, we do have an online store, which we are adding more books to. These books are not currently available on our online store, but if you are in the area or passing through Frederick and you would like to pick up those books, we do have both of those for sale in our museum store, and highly recommend picking them up. Dr. Guy Hasegawa, was the book on the right. The Mending Broken Soldiers is a longtime board member for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and someone who will hopefully be coming on to an online conversation like this one very soon to talk about a new up and coming project that he has coming, which we are very, very excited about. So Becky, you open and available for some questions from our comment section?
Sure.
Excellent. So if you do have any questions, folks, I have a few here, but if you have any questions for Becky about her presentation today about Fort Fisher, please feel free to add that to the chat. Our first question was actually about landmines and naval mines, asking if there were any of them used around Fort Fisher during the Civil War.
Actually, yes. There was a minefield in front of the land face of the fort. And then there were also torpedoes and mines in the New Inlet channel. So the torpedoes that were in front of Fort Fisher failed to work, either because the fuses or the lines got severed. But torpedoes definitely were in the Cape Fear River. And when the Union forces were making their way up the Cape Fear River after Fort Fisher fell, the Navy had to deal with torpedoes and floating mines in the Cape Fear River on numerous occasions.
Excellent. And I'm about to add in to the chat, and I'll have this in the description below, because this came up. We did record a presentation with the author, Ken Rutherford, Dr. Ken Rutherford, of a book about landmines and their use during the American Civil War. That is on our YouTube channel as well. I'll drop a link in just a second into the chat, as well as into the discussion, or the area description below this video as well. Another question we have here, and I'm going to add a little bit to this as well, comes from Jan, who's a longtime viewer and supporter of the museum. She asks about Confederate surgeons. Did they assist after the fort is captured? Were there Confederate surgeons how did they work with U.S. personnel who are coming into the fort and capturing? Are they working together or not so much?
From what I've read, any U.S. naval wounded were sent back to their vessels. So you can actually find list of wounded Navy personnel on Full3 or Ancestry. But the makeshift hospital that was in the Pulpit battery was run by Confederate surgeons. They were basically captured, but from my understanding, Union medical personnel did come in and help some with the wounded in the makeshift hospital. There's a couple of personal accounts of soldiers and actually naval personnel that talk about the Union forces coming in and helping with the wounded as well. So.
And just out of curiosity, how much do you all know about, who the Confederate surgeons were? Is there a lot of information about who they were at Fort Fisher? Or
we do have a list of the names. Dr. Singleton was one of them. Dr. Shepard was another one. They were actually on the captured list of officers for Fort Fisher. So if you look at the New York Times or New York Tribune, like January 17th, like the week after the capture of Fort Fisher, there's basically a list of Confederate officers captured. Now the enlisted men are not listed, only the wounded a month later are finally making the newspapers at that point. So yeah, they did have surgeons still working with them. Now the surgeons were actually sent up to New York to Fort Columbus because they were officers. So they're sent up there as POWs. So they're separated from the enlisted men at that point.
Gotcha. Thank you. And let's see here. Oh, Jan has another question, and that is related to, were there any women nurses that are involved in anything in the aftermath of the capture of Fort Fisher?
No, not that we know of. If there were any female nurses, they would have been up at hospital numbers 4 and 5 in Wilmington, but I don't know of any female nurses that worked up there. prior to the fall of Wilmington. But down here at Fort Fisher, it was all males who were nurses down here, or hospital stewards.
All right, and we have Wade has asked a question as well, talking about the two patients, I believe, that you referenced that were captured at Smithville, in parentheses, Southport. Any idea whether the amputations were done at the fort or were they done at the Confederate hospital at Smithville?
They were actually done at Point Lookout. So they were wounded for a whole month, and it wasn't until they were brought up to Point Lookout and admitted to Hammond General Hospital that their surgeries took place a month later.
Gotcha. I will say, just on the Point Lookout point, we are at the museum in Frederick. We have a full a diorama laying out the fort, the hospital at Point Lookout, what it looked like, that wagon wheel design that you showed in your presentation, Becky. And yeah, it's fascinating to hear these kind of personal accounts of some of the Confederates who are treated within that hospital. It's fascinating to see that. Let's see, I think that's it for questions that we have for right now. So feel free to add any if you have any before we finish up here. I do want to thank you again, Becky, for coming on with us. This is a topic that gets a lot of interest in regards to Civil War medicine, is prosthetic limbs. And thank you so much for, first of all, conducting all of this research and for being so willing to share it with us.
My pleasure. I think it's a part of Civil War history that people seem to forget about. They always focus on the battles and the leaders, but they don't think about the aftermath. What happens to these soldiers who lose their limbs, and how do they get on with their lives, post-war? So I think it's an interesting story. And like I said, working at Bentonville Battlefield for about 9 years, we interpret Civil War field medicine. The Harper House up there is displayed and interpreted as the 14th Army Corps Field Hospital. So that's where I got my feet wet in Civil War medicine. But having this and being a Fort Fisher veteran, Fort Fisher artifact, it kind of means a little bit more, which is really cool. And we get a lot of people that look at it and they're really surprised that the technology in it. Side story, Ed Bars came here one time with a small little private group, and we had just received that leg. We were about ready to put it on display, and I'm like, "Hey, Ed, look!" And with him being wounded during World War II, but the thing is, the toes moved. You could see where the joint and the ankle would have moved. So it was pretty high technology for its time. But you can see that, these did work for a while, but then the soldiers got tired of them, and so they resorted to homemade versions. But it's a neat part of technology and part of history.
Yeah, we see that in our collection as well. We have a homemade peg leg that belonged to a private from a main unit. Interesting to see kind of how they, as the years go by, how these veterans, are going to use their own ingenuity. He ran a lumber mill, so he had ready access to wood to make his own leg that was more comfortable. But and I love that. I love everybody has an Ed Bars story. Thanks for sharing yours.
I have a couple of Ed Bars stories, but that's the most one that's related to this presentation. But yeah, Ed was a unique and amazing historian. So
absolutely did amazing work to preserve and to tell Civil War history. Very thankful to have had the opportunity to meet him on a number of occasions myself. So as for Fort Fisher and folks who may be watching, who may be interested in coming to visit, who may not have yet visited the site, how do visitors go about learning more information about the historic site and how they can visit?
So you can go to NC Historic Sites. I don't know the website off the top of my head. I should have had that written down. But if you do a Google search for North Carolina Historic Sites, our website will come up, and the 26 historic sites, you can learn more about it, but you can click on Fort Fisher, learn more about us, what we're doing now that COVID seems to be kind of waning down. We're actually going to be doing an artillery program in July 10th. So anybody's down in the area, please feel free to come down. All of our programs are free. We do, everything is free. And then we do have the Friends of Fort Fisher that do help us with programming to help us with little things like that too.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Becky, again for being here. You're getting lots of applause and thumbs up from our comments section. Thank you for being here and for sharing your research and sharing these stories from Fort Fisher. It's been a delight to have you here.
It's been a delight being with you. I'm finally glad that we finally got to this point. I know we had to put it off a couple of times, but it's been a great experience, and looking forward to working with you guys on anything in the future.
Yes, and I will say before we leave, before we end the stream today, that for those of you who are watching with us still, who may be members of the museum or supporters of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, we are very excited. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be announcing a project related to artificial limbs in the collection of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. So this is a topic we're going to be coming back around on in our YouTube programs, as well as with some of our artifacts. So I'll leave that with a little bit of a teaser there. And I know for sure that we'll be getting in touch with you, Becky, about some of the research that you've done on these artificial limbs, and as we begin to announce this project, which I can't reveal too much more about at this point, but will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I hope y'all will tune in and stay tuned, subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up on the video if you've enjoyed it. That helps more people to join in, and become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. You'll support programs like this, as well as get lots of cool perks, free visits to the museum, free access to our museum programming as well when we get back to that as the summer continues in 2021. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. Becky, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. My pleasure.